Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 6th of November 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. And joining me, hopefully, in a moment is David Scott. But I just wanted to begin by saying well done to the people of Lewis. I mean, I could not let this pass and not make comment on it. An immense, I mean, it must have been 20 feet high or so, guy for the bonfire. And David, what can you say about this? Somebody's gone to a lot of effort to make a point, and it's a point well made, isn't it?
Yes, well, I mean, it does illustrate there's some degree of freedom of speech left in England at any rate. I think if you tried something equivalent with a Scottish politician, things might go badly. But you can still do this with the Prime Minister, it would seem.
Well, indeed. It's someday perhaps we'll see the real thing, but in the meantime, we've got to do with a wooden guy. But anyway, more details, of course, of the Theresa May's hacking of our of our privacy and investigatory powers starting to come out. Motherboard website here pointing out that the National Crime Agency has been one of those involved in hacking people's computers. As we made the point over the last couple of days, of course, this investigatory powers bill seems to be, there's not really anything particularly new in it. It seems to be mainly legalizing activities which have been going on for a number of years.
Illegally going on for a number of years. We're
Well,
seeing this admitted now that there's been huge surveillance of dubious legality for a decade or more. So yes, at least it's being officially recognised. Whether that makes us more or less safe from intrusion, I'm not so sure.
well, no, I don't think it does, and that's true. And also the register here pointing out one of the aspects of the database of people's browsing habits, which is part of this new investigatory powers bill. And really, they're highlighting the fact that that whenever a request is made against one of these databases from an internet service provider, that there are request filters there to make sure that they get the right information. Now, of course, the register making the point that this is pretty significant, and I advise everybody to read this article because what's of particular interest was the response from government, who really were pretty upset when the register posted this article. And so do have a read at the article and also read the government's response to it. But at the end of the day, what we've got here is ISPs expected to store people's browsing habits and pretty technical mechanisms for querying that database.
Yes,
And
I like the register's front page there. It's again to quote Gordon Brewer talking about the name person scheme up in Scotland. It's all a little bit East German, isn't it? And that's very much what we're seeing on a national scale here. I, I I've got lots of questions about this, Mike. This is to stop extremism. Yes, that's the excuse, is it?
that is one of the excuses. Yes.
And as you know, this includes non-violent extremism. I would like to know, frankly, what who's on the list, right? What if you are interested in, say, tax revolt? Does that make you a non-violent extremist? If you're interested in the free man movement, what about that? How about wanting to secede? How about having libertarian views? How about having a religious belief? What exactly gets you on the list of non-approved thought these days? It's not clear to me.
Well, surely the name person scheme says it all, David. It's everybody.
Well, everybody's potentially a threat. I think this is the underlying agenda here. The government views now each and every single one of us as potentially a threat, potentially harmful, potentially extreme, potentially dangerous. You might have ideas that are not approved ideas. And so we're all watched, are we? Well, certainly we're going to be watched on the internet, and we're going to be watched in Scotland as we raise our children.
I think this has been going on for quite some time, but I mean, what the point I was making yesterday was that this is a fundamental shift in the notional relationship between the individual and the state. And of course, nothing really represents that shift because this is a continuous shift that's been going on for quite a few years now, but it's in many different aspects of our lives. But I think you did mention the named person scheme, and we will talk about that now because that is one area which really does represent, really does represent a significant shift in the relationship between the individual and the state. And the question that's being asked on this website here is Scotland any closer to becoming the best place for children to grow up? Is it?
Well, no, it's not. And here we're seeing people speak out about the named person scheme and pointing out that the state has nothing to offer here. The state does not. It can't even define what it's trying to achieve. It can't even define what the goals are. You're talking about putting state functionaries in charge of families, and it comes down to that. It comes down to a matter of authority and compliance, and your compliance is required. And that's not the way to generate happy families. That's not the way for children to grow up with an interest in life and a love for their fellow man. It's nonsense. It's a kind of pseudo-religion. It's believing the state can perhaps replace God in the life of the nation, but it's certainly not effective.
But that's exactly what the state is trying to do, is to replace God in the minds of individuals, because that's really part and parcel of what this the whole human rights issue is, that there is no higher power, that the state is the highest power in your life, and everything. In fact, it can do no wrong, and in fact, the fact that it can do no wrong is represented in the fact that they are increasingly hiding what they're trying to do, and closing down freedom of information, for example, because how dare you actually question anything that the state is doing?
Yes, it becomes what was it that Nixon said? I'm saying if the president does it, that means it is legal. You know, it's becoming that way in Scotland. If the state does it, it makes it right, simply by definition. The named person scheme is quite clear on this. There's no provision in this scheme anywhere for state officials to be wrong, right, and the parents to be right. That possibility, it would appear, never occurred to anybody.
Do you think it really didn't occur to anybody? Is this the law of unintended consequences, or is this in fact the law of intended consequences that's in operation here?
I do not think for a moment that this is an accident. People don't make these mistakes. The people who write the laws are not that stupid. They do not make these mistakes. This has to be absolutely intentional. It's a movement of power from the individual, from the family, from diverse power throughout society, and concentrating it in the state, and its intention.
Well, the good news is that the No to Name Person scheme has a significant number of signatures on the petition now.
Yes, past 15,000 this last week. Yes,
and how is that growing? Is it something that is now obtaining sort of widespread understanding within Scotland, and is it starting to grow exponentially now?
It's growing steadily. Scotland's a very slow to anger society, and it's growing steadily in an unrelenting manner. 15,000, that's equivalent UK wide to about 160,000. So it's a pretty large petition already. It would be the sort of thing that would already be requiring debate in Parliament if it was UK wide. So it's a fairly significant number. But most people still haven't heard of this. I was outside the Labour Party conference last week, handing out some leaflets on this and talking to the people going in, quite a few of them, and these are politically engaged activists, didn't know what the scheme was about. The ordinary people, most still don't know, but when they find out, they're not happy.
Yes, indeed. But there's the legal challenge now has a date in the Supreme Court. So where is this likely to take things?
Well, this could be quite significant. The court challenge is March, and that's going to the Supreme Court in London. Having had two goes, the Scottish courts have had two goes to get this right. They have manifestly failed. They're saying, well, it's not having any effect on the family. It doesn't change family relationships and relationships to the state in any way, says the Scottish courts, when it quite clearly and plainly does, in a number of ways. And the courts in Scotland have been willfully blind to this. So we'll see if the Supreme Court can do any better. There are quite high hopes that it will. And then if that doesn't work, it'll be off to European courts as well. But there's something else that will be happening here. We're going to see increasingly civil disobedience on this. Now you have to have a named person who's assessing your ability to be a parent as a midwife. There doesn't seem to be a way out of this. You can't have a midwife that's not also performing that function for the state, gathering information on you and deciding whether or not you're fit to be a parent in the new Scotland. So how do you actually have a baby in Scotland if you believe in freedom? What, do you move to England right away? You know, as soon as you get a positive pregnancy test? I mean, some people are moving. We see that on a fairly regular basis. People are leaving the country to get away from this. And apart from that, I can really make no suggestions to how it could be resolved. There doesn't seem to be a way with the Scottish government in place where this can be taken down to something more reasonable, or where individuals can be given any opt-out.
Well, at least it is starting to get national coverage now. And this article in the Express, I mean, using the word outrage over intrusive health visitor questioning. And you pointed me at the document that this article is talking about, and the little diagram here which explains well, they're calling it a pathway, health visitors home visiting pathway, pre-birth to preschool. This is spectacular.
Yes, 11 visits from the health visitor from before birth, including some of these will last for 90 minutes, going through a checklist of well-being indicators. They will inquire whether you're beating your wife. I think gender-based violence is always viewed as being male and female in the New Scotland. They will inquire how your finances are and whether you have any money worries. They will advise you on many things. Vaccination is one. There will be trouble if you do not vaccinate your child. They will advise you on avoiding sudden infant death syndrome, even though there's a huge link between that and vaccinations. We won't talk about that, but we'll give you advice on that. We'll take a dim view of smoking. We'll take a dim view of drinking. We'll take a dim view of anything that we don't like or have a gut feel isn't quite right. And during these 90-minute interviews, we'll collect a lot of information, and that will be entered into a government database. And any concerns will be shared with other parts of the government in the single joined-up super organisation that is the Scottish state.
Well, I mean, just looking at that, so just put this back up again for a second, just looking at this, you're going to have an antenatal letter at pre-birth. What are the chances that this is going to put people off actually going and getting their pregnancy checked?
It will have all sorts of unintended consequences because people will flee from this in any way they can. You'll find that there'll be, I mean, the midwife's a difficult one because health visitors are, let's be frank, fairly useless. And if you've had one child or you have a parent nearby and a bit of a support system, you really don't need a health visitor. And they're not really doing anything that's particularly vital. They weigh the child and have a cup of tea, and that's at the moment pretty much it. So what you'll find is people will say no thank you to the health visitor service, even though that's a risk indicator. Your non-engagement is a risk indicator because who knows what you're doing if the state's not watching you. You know, you don't know how to love your child unless we've told you. But a lot of people will just say, no, thank you. 11 visits, 90-minute interviews, checklists of well-being indicators, asking about my finances, assessing mental health. These untrained health visitors are going to be assessing the mental health of parents and the baby. I don't know how they do any of this, but that's what's in the literature. So people will say no. It's harder to say no to a midwife. I'm not quite sure how you manage that one.
Well, indeed. But nonetheless, I mean, this must be one of the relatively easy government initiatives that's relatively easy to say no to, because if everybody does it, are they going to take everybody's children? Are they going to take everybody to court? How are they going to deal with it if there is a mass refusal to cooperate?
There will be mass civil disobedience on this, but remember what they'll do is there'll be threats, and they won't take everyone's children, but they will target people, and it will be random. Just like in Franco's Spain, if you cross the wrong person at the wrong time on the wrong day, then you're for it. There isn't a pattern to it, and they can't target everybody because they don't have the resources. But some people, entirely innocent people who love their kids, will be targeted. Lives will be ruined, families will be destroyed. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. How you resist it? Well, you say no, but remember, saying no is a risk indicator. So saying no comes with the hazard that attracts attention. People are frightened. People are frightened to speak out in this. People with kids in Scotland are frightened.
Well, that says it all, doesn't it? If we view our state as being anything other than benevolent, then this has got to be an indicator that we're already at a stage where it isn't, and people can't be naive to this. Now, moving on, then going back to the bin lorry story in Glasgow, this, of course, isn't really about the incident itself, but more the activities of the Crown around that. So there's been a new documentary made. Is that how it?
Yes, BBC did an investigative report on this, and we say many bad things about the BBC, and probably we don't say enough bad things about the BBC, but there's certainly elements in the BBC and elements within the BBC Scotland who are actually doing very good work. It was a very good documentary, and it got a lot of facts out into the public domain that need to be in the public domain. So you'd have to say, well done, the BBC, on this. What it showed is that the Crown Office made a very hasty decision not to prosecute. The driver of the bin lorry had a history of a long and tortuous health history, including fainting at the wheel of a bus. Information which he should have notified DVLA about, he did not. He should have notified his employer about, he did not. He concealed this information. He suffered another fainting attack at the wheel of this 25-ton vehicle. His foot went down in the accelerator, and he killed, 6, 7 people?
Yeah. 6,
I think. Injured many more, and it was horrific. Now, the Crown Office decided not to prosecute. The Crown Office Independent Crown Counsel, Mr. Green, told the parents that the previous fainting occurrence by this driver had been in a hot canteen, and it was a one-off incident, and it was not in any way related to driving. None of this was true. He can now not remember saying this. A lot of information came out at the fatal accident inquiry that made it clear that the Crown Office decision was, at the very least, highly questionable. But the Lord Advocate came out and said, no, there was nothing that came out at the fatal accident inquiry that we didn't already know about. But if that was the case, why was the Independent Crown Counsel giving a completely different story to the family? So he seems to be lying. Ironically enough, he also told the families that the bin lorry driver didn't know the difference between telling the truth and lying, because he was a fat, uneducated man from the west of Scotland. So the slim, well-educated man from the east of Scotland, who is the Independent Crown Counsel for the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, also seems to have a problem now with recalling and telling the truth. And we're talking about people who've lost their nearest and dearest, lost their loved ones. Frankly, we deserve a higher standard of human decency and adherence to the basic tenets of the law, like thou shalt not bear false witness, from those who work for institutions, tax-funded institutions like the Crown Office.
Indeed, you do wonder what it's going to take to get some of these institutions sorted out. But anyway, let's move on. Financial stuff now, and this is a bit of news from Ireland. And the Bank of Ireland seems to be attacking cash once again. It is pretty much expected that this attack on cash is going to happen. But this is an interesting development because what they have done is they've said we will no longer process cash withdrawals of €700 or less than €700 across the counter. So you must either do without cash or withdraw cash from a cash machine, but we will no longer take cash, give you cash over the counter if you want less than €700. And we will not take any cash input into your bank account for any less than €3,000. And so what they seem to be doing is, maybe this is simply consolidation of staff, that they want to have less people on the tills, less tellers in the banks. But it does seem a bit of an unusual development, does it not?
It certainly does, and it sounds a somewhat strange way of attacking cash, but it is an attack on cash. Cash, as in paper money, is not a wonderful store of value because its intrinsic value is zero. It's a confidence trick, and it's not, as we know, backed by anything real other than the worth that the Bank of England manages to put in it from historical confidence. But nonetheless, it's not easily monitored. So it is a good thing that we should keep cash outside the banking system because it gives you a bit of flexibility. It means that you're not able to be controlled if they decide to control the banking system, which is quite likely at some point in the future. There'll be bank holidays and there'll be limits on how much you can withdraw, a la Greece, a la Cyprus. So we're going to see an attack on cash. And we've also got the Bank of England talking about the possibility of negative interest rates being introduced. Now, negative interest rates, which are to force us all to stop saving, because you understand, Mike, saving's a sin here, right? You know, the problem is saving. That's the only problem with the economy. If we just spend more, everything will be okay. So they want to force money out of the banks into circulation to create an artificial boom. And obviously, if we just say, well, we'll take the money, but we'll save it ourselves in cash form, they can't do that. So to have a negative interest rate policy introduced, which is the next step from zero interest rate policy, there needs to be some sort of restriction on cash holding. Otherwise, people will just buy safes and exit the banking system.
Which possibly wouldn't be a bad thing because without it, they can't operate. But let's just move on to this. Actually, is the biggest discussion point we maybe have today, or at least it potentially could be. So I think we'll keep this relatively relatively short because you and I have possibly slightly different views on this. But anyway, Osborne saying here, free markets can't be left to themselves, and I know you would absolutely 100% disagree with that. Now, I wouldn't agree with him with quite in the way that he perhaps is meaning this either, but he's saying that markets can't be left to themselves, and it has to be accepted that governments have a role in helping businesses grow. Now, of course, what he's trying to do here is to continue to push this notion of the Northern Powerhouse, the establishment of city-states, and continuing devolution. But nonetheless, he is making a point about free markets that I'm sure you would like to have some comment on.
Yes, it's not clear to me whether Mr. Osborne actually understands what a market is or what any of the words mean, because what we've got here is actually quite incoherent. He says that government has accepted it had a role in helping business to grow outside of London. It seems to imply that left to itself, we would just have business in London. Now, that makes no sense at all. A free market, the free market goes where there are resources in labour, resources in land. There would be no purpose at all to having things concentrated in London. Why are things concentrated in London? Well, that's where the government is, and that's where the government spending is. That's nothing to do with the free market. That's a parasite upon the free market. And that's where the banks are based. But the banks are based on fraud. Fractional reserve banking is fraud. So you've got a system which is based on theft and fraud that's concentrated in London. What we need is have a system based on freedom and the rule of law. That wouldn't be concentrated in London. That would be dispersed. But he can't see that. He sees these problems which are all come from government intervention in the first place, and thinks, what we need is more government intervention. And essentially, they all think like that. We've got here, he said, actually, it's not enough to let the market does what it does and see London become an ever more successful city. So he seems to be conflating the market with the City of London and the banks. But the free market means a free market in what people want to trade with one another. They buy one another's labour. They find essentially the most valuable ways to serve one another. That's what the free market is. And Osborne doesn't seem to have a clue about this. He says the biggest single thing that lifts people out of poverty is free trade. Right, okay. But this is the talking point. He's learned this. There's no indication that he believes it or understands it. And he then goes on to say that he's going to do things which are not considered classically conservative. I think what that means is totalitarian and socialist. So that's what we should watch for from Mr. Osborne. And then he has a colleague here, Mr. Javid. He says, whether you're a bank rigging interest rates, a car manufacturer cheating on emissions, or a company not paying your fair share of tax, be warned, we will come after you. Okay, let's just think a wee bit about that. A bank rigging interest rates. Well, banks shouldn't set interest rates at all. The Bank of England rigs interest rates. The government rigs interest rates. All interest rates are rigged all of the time. We should stop rigging interest rates and let a free market interest rate evolve. And I tell you this, it would be an awful lot higher than zero. Car manufacturer cheating on emissions. Well, that's government regulation. Who puts that? Who wants that? That's driving up costs. That's not a free market decision. If it was a free market decision, we would have a different decision. We wouldn't know in advance what it was going to be because some bureaucrat wouldn't be writing it down. Or a company not paying your fair share of tax. Tax, I'm afraid, is theft. There's no such concept as a fair tax or a fair share. That is utterly meaningless and incoherent. Therefore, fair share, well, as defined by the government on that particular day, and as somewhere else they'll define it in a different way. There's no such thing as fairness in there. It's just arbitrary. It's arbitrary rule, arbitrary law. I would point out that back in the 17th century, we had a wee bit more knowledge about this. Adam Smith talking about trade restrictions. He said, without trade restrictions, the obvious and simple system of natural liberty establishes itself of its own accord. Every man is left perfectly free to pursue his own interest in his own way. The sovereign is completely discharged from a duty for which no human wisdom or knowledge could ever be sufficient, the duty of superintending the industry of private people and of directing it towards the employments most suitable in the interests of society. And he knew that. And George Osborne, what he's saying is George Osborne knows what we all should be doing. He has the wisdom, George Osborne has the wisdom to direct each of us in what we do with our lives for the benefit of all of society. Nobody has that wisdom, certainly not George Osborne. Adam Smith knew it, we know it in our hearts, and there's no amount of Telegraph articles going to persuade people otherwise.
Well, of course, George Osborne would like everybody to think that he knows that, but he's only doing what he's told. And another man who's doing what he's told is Andrew Tirry, who's the chair of the Finance Select Committee. And he has always done what he's told. He has always refused, for example, to accept that breaking up the banks in the style of Glass-Steagall, separating the commercial from the investment banking sections, completely separating them. He refuses to accept that that would be a good thing. And so we're left with this situation that we've got the ring fence, which is possibly going to come in 2019. But all the while it's being watered down and watered down and watered down to the point that we already know that they are going to be able to take savings from people's savings accounts into the investment, the speculative sections of banks by issuing dividends. So he refused to do his job at that point, just after the 2008 financial crash. And he continues to do so because what's going on is that Osborne set up this tax on bank profits in the last budget or the budget before. It must have been the last budget. Tirry is now saying that this is uncompetitive. Basically, this tax on the profits of banks would result in the problem that we wouldn't get new banks coming into the market because they'd be put off by the tax. And so this is uncompetitive. So he's referred it to the Competition and Markets Authority, and they have to make a decision on whether this tax is a good thing or not. So there you go. Andrew Tirry standing up for the banks once again. His friends are the bankers, clearly. Well, what do you say about that?
One thing I think is universally true is when a government official starts talking about competition, he's lying. They only use this word when they want to stop something that they don't like. They use it constantly. What we need to have free competition is simply one thing: freedom of entry. Right? Freedom of entry. What stops freedom of entry? Government regulation. If you're looking for anti-competitive spirit in this country, you go to Westminster and you look there.
Well, indeed. Now let's move along straight ahead to Mark Carney, who has apparently no regrets about interest rates. Now you've said something about interest rates already, but what do you want to add on this, on these comments from Carnage?
It's getting just ridiculous. I mean, you've got Mark Carney, and he's cheerleading for the Fed, right? Because the Fed, nobody else cheerleads for the Fed anymore. He's saying that he's sure they'll make the right decision on interest rates. They once again said, well, we can't raise interest rates now, but maybe the next time, maybe December. Well, it's looking very like December. They can't raise interest rates. They've gone down this. We've had zero interest rates for how long? It's getting on. It's what, 8 years now? It was zero.
Yeah.
Right? This is absolutely unprecedented, and it doesn't work anymore. There's so much debt in the system, you can't stimulate the economy by zero interest rates. So where do they go? If they start to raise them, the economy will crash. It's only this artificial stimulus, this economic cocaine that's going into the system that's keeping things apparently on the surface reasonably stable. You take this drug away, the economy will fall in its face right away. They can't raise interest rates. They have to keep pretending they can. It's a long pantomime.
On Radio 4 this morning, I think it was Radio 4, might have been Radio 5, the Bank of England's Deputy Governor, and that's Dame Namet Minouche, was talking about a number of things. She was talking about interest rates, and she was saying that interest rates, they were talking about the fact that the overheating housing market, property market in London, and they were saying that interest rates shouldn't be used as a mechanism for controlling the housing markets anywhere, and really, so they basically were saying they weren't going to raise interest rates in order to try to cool down the housing market. But what really fascinated with me about that conversation was that she thought that the UK was pretty much at full employment at the moment. That might come as a surprise to you, but as far as she is concerned, 5% unemployment is the normal. That's what all countries should have. And so because we're somewhere close to that, that's pretty much full employment. And of course, what people consistently ignore when they talk about employment figures is, first of all, what type of employment is available out there at the moment, and what is the quality of the jobs that are available out there, what are they paying, and so on. But the other thing that is generally ignored by these people are the economically inactive, people that are not on the unemployment register but are economically inactive for some other reason. And of course, when you take those figures into account, we have significantly more than 5% of the working population not being productive in one way or another. So I honestly thought that she was just so completely disconnected from reality that it's not really possible for her to do a job.
Or corrupt. I mean, she's paid to believe certain things. Her salary depends on her believing certain things, so she believes certain things. The headline unemployment figure is one that's politically sensitive and therefore is hugely manipulated. If you look at America's unemployment rate has been steadily falling. Their employment rate hasn't gone up at all. It's flatlined. It's a complete con. People are becoming economically inactive. They're getting discouraged. They're no longer looking for work, or they are languishing on benefits somewhere that's not counted as unemployment. it's far from full employment. And I would have to point out that if you ask people who have run companies and small companies in this country, the ones that generate all the growth and all the employment, the most dangerous thing that most companies can do these days in Britain is to employ someone. The most legally dangerous thing you can do is offer someone a job, and that's wrong. And we would have, if we had an easier access into and out of employment, we would have a much more fluid society. We'd have much more upwardly mobile people because they'd be able to get the foot in the bottom rung of the ladder and start to improve themselves and start to learn and start to develop their lives. And they can't, because companies can't take them on because they can't take the risk.
Indeed, and I mean that is another situation that's been building up for quite some time. Okay, let's move on. Last subject of the day: food futures. This is a new report from an organisation called WRAP, and WRAP has a vision for the world in which resources are used sustainably, and their mission is to accelerate the move to a sustainable, resource-efficient economy through reinventing how we design, produce and sell products. They work uniquely and by design in the space between governments, businesses, communities, thinkers and individuals, forging powerful partnerships and delivering groundbreaking initiatives to support more sustainable economies and society. Brilliant. So let's just have a look at their chief executive and see what kind of people are running this organisation. So we've got Dr. Liz Goodwin here, well, she seems to have worked for ICI and these kinds of companies. So what is this about? Let's have a look. Well, they produced a report, and this is typical of the content of this. Climate risks to foods availability, safety and quality. They're talking about alternative foods and proteins. So we're talking about eating insects. Again, this has been a recurring theme over the last number of years from various people discussing sustainable food production. We're talking about scaling sustainability standards, the changing landscape of consumer choice. And we're talking about the smart brackets empty factory. So we're talking about having factories which are processing food without any human intervention at all, using smart technologies, and so on. So you took a glance through this, David. What was your take on it?
Well, it's really horrific. I mean, the good news is it's nonsense. None of this is going to happen. None of this is going to be necessary. Climate change is not caused by CO2. The effect of CO2 is that the planet's getting greener, which means more productive in terms of food generation. And we've been here before, Mike. There was a book in the 60s called The Population Bomb. This was written, a best-selling book written by Professor Paul R. Ehrlich and his wife, who wasn't credited. Now, it's Malthusian theory that we're going to have an exponential growth in population and then we're all going to starve. So this is what they said. They said that nothing can prevent famines in which hundreds of millions of people will die during the 1970s. There would be a substantial increase in the world death rate. Right now, in reality, what we had was a substantial decrease in the world death rate. And despite the fact that the population more than doubled, the average number of calories consumed per person went up by 24%. He was wrong in every way that's possible to be wrong. And in response to that, he was given, and I'm not making this up, he was given a Genius Award for that book. So there we go. If you want to be a genius in the 21st century world, be wrong about everything. So we've got another organisation here that are essentially putting the same sort of Malthusian things forward. They're painting a world that looks like the plot of Soylent Green, and the bottom line is we're not overpopulated. The climate's not changing that significantly, and if it is, it's beneficial. What change there is beneficial, and the problems that we have, where we have significant problems, are ones that we create for ourselves by socialism, by war, right, by taking land out of private ownership and putting it into state farms. This type of thing creates famines. By trying to geoengineer the climate, this is not going well. By having enormous some of the big dam projects that have seen seas disappear in the middle of Asia. Have caused very severe climate effects. We're well able to cause severe climate effects, but it's quite understandable what's causing it, and it's not needing an enormous world government, a change in how we live in order to solve the problem. What we need is simply to be left alone.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, I think we'll end for today. I do apologise for the technical issues. And hopefully next week, David, things will be a bit more stable.
Yes, I should apologise for technical issues. It's completely at this end. It's nothing to do with the UK column office. It's we have an extremely unstable broadband line at the moment, and it's been so bad we've changed supplier, and it's being replaced next Wednesday. So for next week's show, everything should be back to normal.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much, David. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for everybody joining us today. We will see you at 1 o'clock as usual on Monday. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.